it's about understanding ourselves, creative imagination. Yeah.
Correct. So now I may be straying a little further away from what, not a little, a lot further away from what you're discussing. But does Coleridge seem sort of, stray over the ideas of subconscious over here in any sense? Because since he mentions fragmented imagination through association and all of that, those are very Freudian ideas, and of course that came very much later. But does he seem to stumble upon these ideas very much early in time?
Interesting question. But and you are aware of the fact that Freud and the theories of unconscious and subconscious are much later developments, almost 70 years after Coleridge's work. So, besides, it's in a very different domain of psychiatry and discipline of treating diseases, right? In medical science, that's the domain in which those ideas feature prominently in Freud. And I'm planning to discuss all this semester because we lose out on too many things in a hurry to wind up things. But let's see, we will have more extra classes for that. But ideas of unconscious and subconscious have some place in German idealism as well, right? But they are not prominent or central, right? They are not most important parts of those systems produced by Hegel or Kant, right? And they are not very prominent even in Coleridge. You find the idea of will as existing in human noumena, right? In the domain of noumena. And now noumena is the unknowable part of the world, and it includes human beings as well, right? So what Jaldi understands about herself is also partially, it's very partial and incomplete because Jaldi in herself is never understood by your thinking. So there is a part or dimension of yourself which is beyond understanding, right? So there is, and that is where philosophers like Schopenhauer would bring in will, and Schopenhauer's thoughts, right, which were critical of Hegel and Kant, in some way anticipate Nietzsche and Freud later on. But in Coleridge, we don't find such kind of importance given to the subconscious or unconscious aspects of human mind. Right.
Right, sir, right.
And he seems to, if you look at this, where does it say that? Yeah, he does emphasize that fancy has more, it's more uh, element of choice by which he may mean something that is, you may choose to what to fantasize, right? You selectively produce fantasies, while what is produced by secondary imagination is more creative. And he doesn't use those words, but he does seem to go into the domain of unconscious or subconscious, as you suggest, right? But these are not the theories or ideas that are prominent in these people's writing, right? So that is why we are looking at a history of criticism rather than criticism.
right, right, sir. This just came up because imagination has
But
very much.
yeah, it came to your mind, right?
Yeah.
Good.
So just two more questions, and these are related to criticism. So
Right,
yes,
right. Yes.
the very next paragraph, it is secondary imagination, which is poetic. Da da da. So is he talking about a genius? Kant's idea
Yes,
of.
yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
But he doesn't seem to use that word in a prominent way, while
exactly.
Kant is using it as a
Specifically
prominent.
states,
Yes.
explicitly that's a GS.
Right.
Anyway. Right, and the last question is that he, in the same paragraph, in the later sentences, in the later area, I think in the last sixth line, the primary imagination operates in an involuntary manner in all people, and the secondary imagination belongs to the poet and put into action by conscious will.
Right. So
He-
that's the, I think, what question you were asking. Right. So secondary imagination does involve conscious will, while primary is more like cognitive faculty. When I say this is a pen, you don't use conscious mind to figure out, "Arey, ye pen hai." है ना? You immediately notice it's a pen. So there is a kind of automatic or kind of immediacy to primary imagination. Secondary imagination involves agency, right, and conscious choice and will. That's what he is pointing out.
Right. So my question being, isn't this sort of contradictory to William Wordsworth said, like poetry is emotion, spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility. This is because in his statement there doesn't seem to be a grasp on the creation of the poet or the artist, as opposed to when Coleridge suggests that the artist has sort of a grasp on his or her work.
Yeah, yeah.
Something.
But even the spontaneity part of Wordsworth is, again, as we were discussing, to be not to be understood out of its context. It's spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions that are recollected in tranquility, and they are, as you rightly said, it seems to be less voluntary. So I won't use words like conscious, subconscious, unconscious, but I would use words like voluntary, right? So there is greater command of conscious will on secondary imagination, according to Coleridge. But in Wordsworth case, it seems to be less voluntary, right? It's a spontaneous. There is a more emphasis on spontaneity. Yeah. And involuntary. That they flash. I always think of daffodils as a statement about romantic poetics. The poem Daffodil. They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, right? So it's a kind of automatically they flash upon that inward eye, the daffodils that he has seen all of a sudden, right? So it does seem to have certain kind of automatic force in Wordsworth, while in Coleridge there is a greater conscious effort or will involved.
Yes, exactly. So that is it.
And again, you can see that his idea theory of poetry is very different from
Exactly.
languages are different from Wordsworth's idea of poetic language, right?
Yes, that's why it came up to my mind, because
You can connect them too. You can connect them too. In a sense that poetic language requires higher level of reflectivity, philosophical reflectivity, and greater vocabulary, right? And that's why it is not just utterance by a rustic or illiterate person. That's what Coleridge is saying about poetic utterance, right? While Wordsworth would say poetry is language used by men. Poet, is a man talking to men. And it's more like rustic man talking to another rustic man. And rusticity is a kind of marker of authenticity and naturalness for Wordsworth, which is missing in Coleridge.
right. So that is why this contrast came.
Good, yeah.
Anyway, that's it. That's it for now, at least.
Okay. Good. It's good that you read, think, and you come up with questions. It should happen. Even if we are in hurry, questions for me is more important. So even if you feel that we don't have that much time on our hand, please raise questions, right? Because that involves thinking on your part. And when you ask this question, it helps others to understand many things as well, right? So how many of you felt this conversation was useful for your understanding? How many of you felt this? Raise your hands. Right. So many, right? Mansi, Payal, Komal, Mansi, Amira, Edwin, Grishma, Digvijay, Asma, Vedika. Yes. So you can see that, right? 10 people felt that this conversation helped them to understand things better. Okay, so that is how actually, learning happens. If I keep on talking, then very often you may feel that you have understood. But when Jaldi came up with these queries, you thought, "Arey, we had not thought of these issues," right? And that's how it helped you. So classroom discussions are very important, and some people are shy. Some people feel, and especially on an online. And this is what I have learned from online teaching, that people who hesitate to ask questions in a classroom, live classroom, because then people give their stares. बहुत होशियारी हार रहा है, ज़्यादा शान पट्टी मत कर, बैठे जा ऐसे, पता है तू भी बहुत होशियार है. That kind of stares you don't receive, and there is also less fear of people laughing at you. So uh, there are people who are more comfortable in online mode. ऐसे भी मैंने सुना है. I personally am not one of them, right? But I don't. If I am a student, I would not love to attend online classes. But I think there would be some people who find it more comfortable, comfort zone. How many of you have that kind of experience of being more comfortable online rather than offline? Because you are not afraid of being judged by your batchmates. Yes. Okay. Yes. No offline classes any day. Jan is saying that she doesn't want offline classes. Is that what you are saying? No, she's saying
No,
offline
sir.
classes.
I mean offline classes. Yes, no online classes.
Even I would not enjoy online classes, but this is majburi. Okay. So romanticism in America is what we had started, and we had started discussing some of the important aspects of romanticism, and we had brought in certain ideas of comparative studies. That romanticism in Germany would not be same as romanticism in France, would not be same as your romanticism in Britain, would not be same as romanticism in America. And what sets apart romanticism in Britain from romanticism in America is its history, but also its geography, right? And these are the points that we have discussed, because history and geography are not separable in my view, right? Because history is about temporality and geography is about space. Space and time you cannot separate any longer after Einstein, right? So we discussed how American Romanticism has a different kind of historical dimension to it and geographical dimension to it. And we discussed how America was also as rapidly or even more rapidly industrializing nations, producing a huge class, uh, uh, different kind of bourgeoisie, right, from British one. And there was a distinctive emphasis of on Puritan form of Protestantism in America. That these are the things that we have discussed. And besides, America was a land of immigrants right from the beginning. Means the colonizers and from all over Europe, Portugal, Spain, who destroyed very often the Native American civilization, but they themselves immigrants, right? So British population which reached America and founded this states, which later on went on to become United States of America. This history is very different from British history, as we have been discussing. British history has this emphasis of how monarchy, right, turned the whole thing around. Monarchy in Tudor monarch Henry VIII turned around the whole religious organization of his country because he wanted to have male heir, and he founded Anglican Church, which was Protestant in its outlook, so that he can divorce his first wife and get remarried. And Britain also saw civil war between monarchy versus parliament, right? And these are the things that have never happened in America. You don't have monarchy in America, and that is why Americans, and especially the transcendentalists or the romantics, I will just take a call in one moment. I will